I turned onto the long gravel drive, feeling every bump shake my old 1985 Toyota. The radio crackled to life, a tune from the 70s. My husband used to hum along with it, tapping the steering wheel like it was a piano. I smiled, but it faded when I saw the house. It was my son Eric's. Modern, white, perfect hedges. And parked in the driveway were shiny SUVs and one of those new electric cars. I pulled up slowly, careful not to stall, but as soon as I stepped out, I caught the looks. My daughter-in-law, Rebecca, glanced from the porch. Her eyes scanned my car and then met her sister's. A snort, a whisper, laughter. I pretended not to see it. "Grandma's here!" my youngest grandson yelled, racing toward me. That warmed my heart, until he got close and said, "Why do you still drive that rusty thing? Doesn't it smell weird inside?" Eric walked out next. Tall, proud, clean-shaven, always perfect. He kissed my cheek and said softly, "You know, Mom, you really ought to let that car go. It's kind of embarrassing." Embarrassing. I smiled, nodding, like it didn't sting. But it did. That car wasn't just a car. It was the last thing I owned that hadn't been touched since my husband passed. We took our last trip to the Grand Canyon in that car. We sang in it. We cried in it. He held my hand while I drove us home from the hospital. Inside the house, everything was polished and posed. The food was catered. No warmth, no scent of homemade bread. I sat at the edge of the sofa, feeling like a stranger in my own bloodline. Rebecca made a show of offering me vegan appetizers. "We're all gluten-free now, Margaret. You'll adjust." I picked at a cracker, looking around at the walls. Not a single photo of me. Not one of their father either. The grandkids were on tablets, barely looking up. Eric handed me a glass of water like I was fragile. "Just sit, Mom. Relax. You don't have to drive anymore. Anyway." I swallowed hard. "Is everything okay?" I asked quietly. "Of course," he said. "We just worry about you. That old car's not safe, and neither is being alone all the time." Alone. That word hit harder than the rest. Later, as they laughed in the kitchen, I stepped outside, needing air. My car waited at the curb, sun glinting off the faded paint. I ran my fingers along the hood, still warm, still mine. I slid into the driver's seat, letting the leather hug me like an old friend. Then I opened the glove box. And there it was. A sealed envelope, yellowed. My name written in my husband's slanted handwriting. And under it, 4 words. "For the family. When I'm gone." I didn't say anything when they laughed at my car. I just got back in, turned the key, and listened to the soft rumble of the old engine I knew better than most people. That car wasn't just metal. It was the last thing my husband and I ever bought together. We were both 34 when we got it, brand new, paid for in cash, after saving for 2 years. It was fire red back then, shiny and proud. The first day we drove it home, we got caught in a thunderstorm and ended up waiting it out in the grocery store parking lot, eating ice cream out of the tub like teenagers. We had our first real fight in that car, too, over which highway to take on the way to his mother's. I was wrong. He still let me pick. We sang out-of-tune country songs in that car. We drove across 3 states to meet our first grandchild in that car. I remember my husband reaching over, patting the dash, saying, "She's family now, too." Every ding in the door had a story. Every worn-out seatbelt had held someone we loved. When he got sick, I used that car to drive him to every doctor's appointment. He hated hospitals. Said the only thing worse than fluorescent lights were the fake smiling nurses. After his last appointment, when we knew the time was short, we didn't go straight home. He asked me to keep driving. We ended up at the same lake where he'd proposed, sitting in that front seat, holding hands like kids. That car has heard our secrets. It's held our silence. It's been a chapel and a war zone, a home and a getaway. So when Eric looks at it and says, You should really let it go. He doesn't know that would feel like letting him go. My husband, my memories, my whole life before they started telling me I was too old to remember anything at all. I kept that envelope in the glove box for years. I sealed it after the funeral. I remember thinking, when the time comes, I want them to know, not just about the money, about the meaning, about what matters when the shine wears off and all you have left are the stories behind the rust. But the way they laughed, God, it burned. After dinner, when no one was looking, I went outside, slid into the driver's seat, closed the door gently, like I always did. The smell was still the same, old leather and a hint of cinnamon from the air freshener I bought 6 months ago. I reached into the glove box and pulled out the envelope. It was yellowed now, edges curled. My handwriting on the front was still clear. For the family. When I'm gone. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I remembered every word I'd written. I stared at the envelope for a long time, then tucked it into my coat pocket. Maybe it was time. Not just for the letter, but for something bigger. For a reminder that just because something looks old doesn't mean it's empty. The next morning, I took the car in for an oil change. My mechanic, Paul, has worked on it for 20 years. I trust him more than I trust most doctors. He lifted the hood, nodded, and smiled. "You know what's really under here, right?" he said, wiping his hands on a rag. I looked at him. An engine that's still running? He chuckled. "Well, that too. But you've got a rare build here. Your husband must have picked the upgrade package back then. The original parts? They're worth more than the car itself now." I blinked. "What do you mean?" He leaned in. "I mean, if someone knew what they were looking at, they'd see value. A lot of it. But most people only see the rust." I felt a chill. Not fear. Clarity. That car was more than memories. It was more than sentiment. It was worth something. Still worth something. And maybe, just maybe, so was I. I drove home slow that day, holding the steering wheel like it was my husband's hand again. That night, I pulled out the envelope and stared at it one last time, because tomorrow, I'd finally let them read it. Margaret hadn't meant to eavesdrop. The birthday party was for her grandson Caleb, and the backyard buzzed with laughter, balloons, and sugar-loaded children. She'd wandered into the kitchen to rinse out a juice glass when she heard them. Eric's voice, low, annoyed, followed by a sharp whisper from his wife, Monica. "She's just always here," Monica hissed. "We can't keep pretending she's fine." "She's 70, Eric muttered. "The land's too much. The house, the bills, it'll fall on us anyway." Margaret froze. Monica lowered her voice further. "I looked into Oakcrest. It's clean, quiet. We could sell the house, get the kids braces, maybe take that Hawaii trip." "She won't agree. She doesn't have to. You said you were working on the paperwork." Margaret backed away, heart hammering, juice glass forgotten in her hand. Later, during cake cutting, she smiled when spoken to. She laughed at her great-granddaughter's frosting-covered nose. But her mind replayed those words like a broken record. Sell the house. Move her out. Take the land. Eric had grown up in that house. She could still see his muddy boots clomping through the hallway, her own voice scolding him gently from the kitchen. How could he see it now as just a problem to solve? Back home, Margaret locked her bedroom door, even though she never had before. She took down the file folder she kept in her closet, a habit from her teaching days. Inside were tax receipts, property titles, and notes from the lawyer she and George had used before he passed. All untouched. She walked to the mailbox, needing fresh air, needing space to think. Among the bills and flyers was a thick manila envelope with her name on it. No return address. Inside was a change of deed form. Her house, her land, her signature. But she'd never signed it. The date was last week. Margaret sank into the porch chair, the old one George had painted for, her in green. The wind picked up. Distant laughter from the neighbor's yard carried across the fence. She felt like the earth had cracked beneath her feet. Not from age, from betrayal. Margaret sat at her kitchen table, the change of deed form still trembling in her hands. Her breath came in shallow waves, but her eyes, those sharp steel blue eyes that had once commanded an entire classroom, remained steady. Her son might have taken her keys, her comfort, and her dignity, but she still had her wits. And she remembered the name. Ellis. Harold Ellis, the lawyer her late husband had trusted for decades. She rifled through her address book with trembling fingers, thumbing past worn pages smudged with time. There he was, still listed under H, just beneath Henry. Her throat tightened at the name of her late husband, but she pushed the emotion down. There was no room for grief right now, only clarity. She dialed the number. A few rings later, a warm male voice answered. Ellis Law Office. Mr. Ellis, she said quietly, this is Margaret, the widow of Henry Clark. You handled our will and property paperwork years ago. I need your help. There was a pause. Then the man's tone shifted from professional to familiar. Mrs. Clark, of course. I remember you both well. Your husband was a fine man. What's happened? She inhaled slowly and told him everything. How her son and daughter-in-law had started treating her like a burden. How she'd discovered the change of deed form, and how the signature on it wasn't hers. When she finished, there was a pause on the line that stretched long and heavy. I'm so sorry to hear this, Mr. Ellis said. Unfortunately, these things are more common than people think. But Margaret, I still have a file your husband left with me. Something he asked me to keep sealed until either his daughter or you needed it. Margaret straightened. What kind of file? A backup plan, he said. Henry worried about what might happen after he passed. He wanted you protected, but I haven't heard from you in years, so I didn't know if I should reach out. I suppose he knew you'd call when the time was right. Margaret pressed a hand to her chest. Is it something that could undo what they've done? I believe so, Mr. Ellis replied. He left a letter, a copy of the original deed with notarized signatures, and something else, something you're going to want to see for yourself. She felt the tides shift. For the first time in weeks, the world didn't feel like it was crashing in on her. Her instincts hadn't failed her. She wasn't paranoid. She wasn't senile. Her husband, her Henry, had seen the possibility of betrayal and had left a trail of truth. When can I see you? She asked. I can make time this afternoon. Come by the office at 3. Margaret ended the call and leaned back in her chair, her breath steady now. She looked around at the kitchen where she'd raised Eric, where she'd cooked thousands of meals, where birthdays had been sung and arguments had been forgiven. This house wasn't just wood and plaster. It was her life, and she would not let them steal it. Later that afternoon, as she drove her old Toyota down the highway toward town, the car hummed like it always had. She gripped the wheel with purpose. Behind her were echoes of dismissal. Ahead, the road opened wide, lined with justice, waiting to be reclaimed. As she turned into the lot of Ellis Law, her eyes landed on the sign above the door. Harold Ellis, attorney at law, protected. Ting what matters. Margaret smiled to herself. Today, that protection would begin with her. Margaret sat in the old leather chair across from Mr. Ellis as he slid a thick file across the polished oak desk. The sun streamed through the blinds, casting golden slats of light across the folder, as if illuminating something sacred. She hesitated only a moment before opening it. The first document was a letter, written in her husband's firm, familiar script. If you're reading this, Maggie, Something's gone wrong. Her heart clenched. Henry had always been pragmatic, but this letter wasn't just caution. It was foresight. He had known there was a chance his trust in their son might not be returned, and he had acted on it. As she read on, her fingers began to tremble. The letter laid out everything: how Henry had grown suspicious in his final months when Eric began asking too many questions about the deed, about accounts, about planning ahead. Henry hadn't said anything at the time, not wanting to cause a rift. But he'd gone to Mr. Ellis and made a backup plan. Mr. Ellis gently tapped the next item in the folder. "This," he said, "is the real will." The document was clear, dated 6 months before Henry's death, and notarized by 2 witnesses. It outlined in meticulous detail that Margaret was the sole heir to the Clark property, including the house, the surrounding 5 acres, every account they had ever opened together, and the car. Yes, the 1985 Toyota, mentioned specifically by VIN number. She was not only the owner, she was also named executor of the estate. She alone would decide who received what when she passed on. Margaret blinked rapidly, overwhelmed by the clarity of it all. The document didn't leave room for misinterpretation or manipulation. Henry had seen everything coming, and he'd armed her with the truth. I don't understand why no one told me," she whispered. I don't understand why no one told me," she whispered. Mr. Ellis shook his head gently. "Because your son filed a different document, a fake one. He never submitted this version and never mentioned it to the courts. But this, Mrs. Clark, this is the valid one, legally binding. And now, with your permission, I can begin the process of restoring your rights." Margaret's breath left her in a long, shuddering sigh, part relief, part fury. All those smiles from Eric, all those reassurances that he just wanted to help. It was a lie. They'd treated her like a fragile burden while plotting behind her back. She looked down at the will again. Her name was there, bold and unquestioned. Her hand moved to her purse, where she'd placed the sealed envelope she had found in the glove compartment. She hadn't opened it yet. Somehow, she knew the time would come. "You said he left something else?" she asked, her voice quieter now. Mr. Ellis nodded and passed her a small metal key. "Your husband asked me to give you this if things ever got messy. It goes to a safety deposit box at the First Trust Bank downtown. I don't know what's in it, but he said it was the last piece of the puzzle." She stared at the key for a long moment, then tucked it carefully into her coat pocket. Her heart was still racing, but not from panic now, from purpose. As she stood to leave, Mr. Ellis walked her to the door. "Do you want me to handle the filing?" "Yes," she said firmly. "I want it official, and fast." Back in her car, she sat behind the wheel, her fingers resting gently on the worn, sun-cracked steering wheel. For a moment, she let the silence fill the cabin. She looked out at the world with new eyes, not as someone clinging to memories, but as someone carrying proof. Proof of who she was. Proof of what was hers. The car that had carried her through life had also carried the truth. And now It was time for her to drive it forward. She opened the glove box and held the envelope once more. Not yet. Soon. Margaret smiled, bitter and sweet all at once. "They think this car is trash?" she murmured. "It's the key to everything." The summer air was thick with smoke from the grill and forced politeness. The backyard was decorated with cheap red, white, blue banners from the dollar store, and folding chairs circled the picnic table like a scene set for tension. Margaret arrived quietly, driving up in her familiar old Toyota, parking it just out of the way, but not out of sight. As she stepped out, holding her famous potato salad, she could feel the eyes on her. Her daughter-in-law, Trish, gave her a strained smile. "You made it," she said, in the same tone someone might use for a stubborn dog that wandered back home. Margaret gave her a nod and moved toward the picnic table. The rest of the family was scattered around the yard. Kids running in the grass, plastic cups in hand, voices floating over the fence to neighbors who probably heard more than anyone realized. Eric was flipping burgers, talking too loudly about stock prices. No one offered her a chair. She found one on her own. It wasn't long before the barbs began. "We should set up a GoFundMe for a new ride," Trish joked loud enough for everyone to hear. "Maybe something built after the Cold War." A few chuckles followed, shallow and sharp. Margaret didn't flinch. Instead, she reached into her oversized purse and pulled out a simple envelope. From it, she took out 2 pieces of paper. One was a notarized copy of her late husband's will. The other, the forged deed with her signature they didn't know she had discovered. She stood. "Since everyone's gathered," she began, her voice calm but cutting through the chatter, "I thought I'd clear up a few things about my future. And yours." The air shifted. Eric stopped flip. "Pingburgers." Trish looked up with a tight-lipped smirk that faded as Margaret held up the papers. The air shifted. Eric stopped flipping burgers. Trish looked up with a tight-lipped smirk that faded as Margaret held up the papers. "This," Margaret pointed to the forged deed, "was your attempt to take what isn't yours. And this," she raised the will, "is the real, legal documentation of what Dad and I decided, long before he passed." Eric stepped forward. "You're making a scene." "No," Margaret said. "I'm making a point." Trish snorted. "Are we really going to trust old paper and a memory from a woman who still drives a car from the 80s? Margaret's eyes didn't waver. "That car carried your husband to his father's funeral. That car was where he first told me he wanted to build this house. That car was the place I sat when he took his last breath in the hospital parking lot, because he couldn't bear to let me cry alone. So yes, it's old, but it's never lied." A silence fell. Then Eric's temper flared. "You wouldn't dare go to court." Margaret stepped forward. "Try me." She placed the copies on the table, letting the weight of her words settle. "You treated me like an afterthought, like a burden, but I raised you. I kept this family together when your father died, and I won't let you rewrite the story just because you think I'm too old to stop you." Trish folded her arms. "This changes nothing. Families don't sue each other." "Families don't steal from each other either," Margaret said. "But here we are." The burgers began to burn. The smoke rose into the cloudless sky. Somewhere behind them, a child started crying. The tension had cracked the party wide open. Margaret turned to leave, her keys clutched tight in one hand. As she passed her car, she glanced at the sealed envelope still sitting in the glove box. It wasn't time yet, but soon. Inside that envelope was her final truth, and if her family wanted a war, they'd better come prepared. Eric says, "You wouldn't dare go to court." Margaret replies, "Try me." Margaret sat beside Mr. Ellis in the quiet courtroom, her spine straighter than it had been in years. Her hands, though aged, didn't shake. Not this time. Not after everything they had tried to take from her. The court clerk called the session to order, and the probate hearing began. On the other side of the room, Eric and his wife looked smug. Too smug. Margaret noted the way Eric leaned back in his chair like the outcome had already been decided. She almost pitied him. Almost. Mr. Ellis stood with calm authority and submitted the original will, properly signed, notarized, and dated. He also filed a formal objection to the property transfer and requested that the probate court freeze all estate-related decisions until a full investigation was complete. Eric's lawyer, a slick man in an ill-fitting suit, rose to counter. "Your Honor, we contend that Mrs. Green is showing signs of memory impairment. Her own family has observed her confusion. She may not be capable of managing property matters." Margaret's face didn't flinch, but inside, her heart beat like a drum. She had known they'd use this angle. Mr. Ellis remained calm. "We anticipated this claim, Your Honor. We're submitting an independent cognitive assessment from Dr. Nguyen, completed just 2 weeks ago. Her results show above-average memory retention and no signs of decline. We also have a sworn affidavit from her neighbor, Mrs. Lawson, who personally witnessed Mrs. Green being locked out of her own home while fully coherent and in distress. The courtroom shifted slightly. The judge raised an eyebrow and looked at Eric. "Is this true, Mr. Green?" the judge asked. Eric's face turned red. It's not what it looks like." Margaret finally spoke, her voice soft but unwavering. "It's exactly what it looks like." The judge nodded slowly. "We'll allow all documents into evidence. This case is moving forward. But before we proceed further," he reached to his left and picked up a sealed envelope. "There's one more item the court needs to consider." Margaret's breath caught. She hadn't seen that envelope before. The judge held it up and said, "This letter was submitted privately by Mr. Green's attorney, Mr. Ellis, who was instructed to present it only if legal conflict ever arose over the estate." Eric leaned forward, confused. The judge continued, "It's a personal letter, written by your late husband, Mrs. Green, and it appears he had more to say than just what was written in the will." Margaret's eyes welled, but she nodded. The judge opened the envelope slowly, glancing through its handwritten pages. The room went completely still. The judge looked up and said, "Before we proceed, I need to read something your husband left for this hearing." The courtroom hushed as the judge unfolded the letter, its edges yellowed, but the ink bold and alive. Margaret sat still, clutching the edge of the bench, her heart pounding with grief, anticipation, and a strange sense of validation. Her husband's handwriting covered each line, etched with care and intention. "To whom it may concern," the judge began, voice steady and clear, "this letter is to accompany my will, which names my wife, Margaret, as the sole owner and steward of all property, vehicles, accounts, and assets I leave behind." Margaret blinked back tears as the words filled the room. "I am writing this not because I doubt her strength," the letter continued, "but because I fear the world may. And I fear, more than anything, that our children may lose their way, and see her not as the rock of this family, but as a burden in their pursuit of convenience." Heads in the courtroom turned slowly toward Eric and his wife. Their postures stiffened. Neither met Margaret's eyes. The judge read on. "Margaret is the reason we have anything to pass on. Every corner of our home was built with her love. Every inch of our land holds a memory only she remembers. And yes, that old Toyota. She wanted to keep it because it reminded her of road trips, of late-night drives when we were young and broke and in love. That car is not junk. That car is history, and whoever laughs at it does not deserve to hold its keys." A gasp escaped from someone in the courtroom. Even the stenographer paused briefly before continuing her typing. Margaret felt her spine straighten, her hands unclenched. Her husband, even in death, had returned to speak truth into a room of lies. "I leave everything to Margaret," the letter went on, "not because of sentiment, but because of justice. And when she is ready, she will decide where and how it goes next, not one day sooner." The judge folded the letter slowly and looked up. The silence was dense, as though the very air was holding its breath. Margaret's lawyer, Mr. Ellis, glanced over at her and gave a quiet, firm nod. She returned it with resolve. Eric finally spoke up, his voice rough. "That's not fair. You're just taking her word for it that this letter is real?" But the judge was unmoved. "It was filed alongside the will, signed, dated, notarized, stored in this courthouse's own archive." Eric's wife leaned in, whispering something harsh to him under her breath. His shoulders sagged. The judge continued, "Mr. Thompson's words make it clear that he had both foresight and doubt in how his wishes might be handled. This court now has to weigh his letter the will, the legal deed, and the verified testimony that supports Mrs. Thompson's fitness and legal right. Margaret inhaled slowly, the words settling around her like armor. "Final rulings," the judge said, "will be issued after lunch recess." Margaret stood when the court adjourned. Her knees trembled slightly, but her resolve was firm. As she turned to leave the courtroom, she caught sight of her granddaughter, Emma, standing near the back, silent, watching. Their eyes met for the first time in weeks. Emma looked like she wanted to say something, but couldn't. Not yet. Margaret didn't need her to. The letter had done the speaking for both of them. The courtroom had fallen into a tense silence, the kind that settles right before something irreversible is about to be said. Margaret sat upright, both hands folded neatly in her lap, though inside, her heart galloped like it was trying to outrun all the betrayal that had led her here. Her son Eric stared at the judge with furrowed brows, visibly sweating. His wife Dana clutched her purse with white knuckles. They had come expecting a victory. Instead, they were about to witness the truth they'd buried claw its way into the light. The judge looked up from the document. "This will," he said, lifting the papers with deliberate weight, "is valid, fully executed, dated, signed, and notarized well before the deceased's passing. It clearly outlines the full transfer of property, financial holdings, and decision-making authority to Margaret Louise Holloway." Margaret didn't move, but her breath caught in her throat. The room swayed slightly with the wave of emotions crashing through her: vindication, sorrow, exhaustion, and most unexpectedly, peace. Eric stood suddenly. "Your Honor, my mother isn't well. This isn't about documents. It's about her safety. She's been confused. She thought her old car was a family heirloom." The judge raised a hand. "Enough, Mr. Holloway. This court has reviewed psychiatric evaluations, doctor's notes, and first-hand testimony from neighbors. Your mother is of sound mind, and this court is not interested in inherited shame disguised as concern." Dana muttered something under her breath, but Margaret didn't look at her. She didn't need to. Her eyes were on the judge. He cleared his throat again. "As executor of the will," he continued, "Margaret also holds the right to distribute the estate as she sees fit." Eric's head whipped around. "What does that mean?" Margaret stood now, slowly but firmly, as if rising from a deep-rooted truth. She walked to the center of the room, nodded respectfully to the judge, and then turned to face her family. "It means," she began, her voice calm but sharp as a wind off the mountains, "that the estate your father and I built with decades of work, every acre of land, every dollar saved, every nail hammered into that old house, is mine to manage. And I've made my decision." Dana scoffed, but Eric stepped forward. "Mom, don't be emotional. This can still be fixed." Margaret smiled, but there was no softness in it. "I'm not being emotional. I'm being deliberate." She pulled a sheet from her folder. "A portion of the estate will go toward establishing the Holloway Memorial Scholarship, funding rural students who want to become teachers. Your father believed in education. So did I." There were murmurs in the courtroom now, the kind of murmurs that carried both surprise and respect. "As for the rest," Margaret continued, her eyes landing on Grace, her granddaughter who had never once mocked her, who had asked her to teach her how to bake, who had cried after reading her husband's letter. "The rest will go to the only family member who never laughed at my car, who never laughed at me." She walked slowly to Grace, reached into her coat pocket, and pulled out a pair of weathered, familiar keys, the same set that had opened the old Toyota for decades. She placed them into Grace's hand. "It's yours now." Tears welled in the girl's eyes. "Grandma, are you sure?" Eric was fuming now. "She's just a kid. You'd give everything to her? No, Margaret said gently. I'm giving her the values you discarded. Loyalty, kindness, memory, and the keys to a car you thought was worthless. The judge banged the gavel once. Court adjourned. Outside the courthouse, reporters snapped photos, but Margaret didn't stop. Grace walked beside her, still holding the keys, still unsure if this was all real. Behind the Dana muttered into her phone while Eric sulked against a pillar, avoiding the stares of those who had heard the courtroom testimony. Margaret reached her car. She paused, ran a hand over the chipped red hood, and smiled. Then she looked at Grace. Want to take the long road home? Grace beamed. Yes, please. As the engine purred to life, a sound that once meant freedom, love, and quiet power, Margaret felt it settle again into her bones. Not just the ride, the rightness of it all. She didn't need revenge. She had the truth. And now, she had handed it off to the next person who deserved it. The sun hovered low over the Colorado hills, casting a golden filter over the quiet two-lane road. Margaret stood on her front porch, a steaming cup of chamomile in her hand, as the familiar sound of an engine stirred her attention. It wasn't just any engine. It was that engine, the gentle, humming rhythm of her 1985 Toyota, still alive, still defiant against time, just like she had been. Grace waved from the driver's seat, her smile wide, unburdened by inheritance drama or courtroom battles. Her hands on the steering wheel were careful, but confident, like she knew she was holding more than a car. She was holding a piece of history, a heartbeat preserved on wheels. Margaret waved back, and for a long moment, her hand lingered in the air. As Grace disappeared around the bend, a familiar warmth flooded Margaret's chest. Not the ache of old memories, but the healing of new ones being made. That night, Margaret sat at her kitchen table, a pen in hand and her will laid open. The scent of lemon oil and ink mingled in the quiet house. She carefully wrote Grace's full name on the document, her full beneficiary, her executor, the keeper of her story. Not because Grace had asked, but because Grace had listened. Margaret had learned that love didn't always roar. Sometimes, it waited patiently in the background, asking no favors, demanding no recognition. That's what Grace had been. And now, Margaret could rest, knowing everything she and her husband had built would pass into worthy hands. She folded the will and placed it in the strongbox. As she shut the lid, she whispered, "It's done, Henry." Her husband's photo, still perched on the windowsill, seemed to smile back. The next morning, she dipped her brush into a fresh can of paint and began recoating the porch railing. The same porch where she and Henry had spent decades sipping coffee, watching thunderstorms, and waving at neighbors. The white paint glistened under the morning sun, clean and sharp, like a fresh start layered over a strong foundation. Across the yard, tulips were blooming again. She'd planted them with Grace last spring, a quiet afternoon with dirt under their nails and shared laughter in the air. It reminded her that not all legacies were written in courtrooms or etched in documents. Some were planted in flower beds, some were passed down in car rides. Inside, Margaret turned on the radio. An old jazz tune drifted through the house. She hummed along while folding laundry, every motion deliberate, peaceful. For once, her days weren't filled with worry about who would take what or how she'd defend herself next. The storm had passed. The house was hers. The silence no longer felt like loneliness. It felt like freedom. That afternoon, Ruth, her neighbor, came by with a fresh loaf of banana bread and a knowing smile. They sat on the porch together, watching the breeze flirt with the trees. "She drove it like she was born in it," Ruth said, referring to Grace and the Toyota. Margaret chuckled. "She was, in a way." They didn't say much more. They didn't need to. As twilight arrived, Margaret walked through the house one last time, checking locks, turning off lights, whispering little thank yous to the walls that had protected her. She paused at the front door and turned back. The place no longer felt like a battlefield. It felt like home again. Before going to bed, she stood by the window and looked out at the driveway. The Toyota was gone, off on a sleepover at Grace's college dorm. But her presence still lingered. Margaret could almost see the outline of her younger self there. Keys in hand, Henry by her side, a future full of possibilities. She whispered to the wind, "They laughed at my old car, but it carried something they never could. The truth." And as the stars blinked above the Colorado sky, Margaret Holloway went to sleep in the house they tried to take, but could never own. Because legacy, like love, is never just about possessions. It's about what you preserve. And she had preserved it all, on wheels, in ink, and in heart.